Hello, my name's Sheehan, and today I'd like to analyse RoboCop. This film was released in 1987, it's directed by Paul Verhoeven. The story was written by Edward Neumeier and Michael Miner, and it stars Peter Weller, Nancy Allen and Kurtwood Smith. Now, if you could sum up this film in a sentence, it might be something like, in the not too distant future, in Detroit, a cyborg cop brings down a kingpin of the criminal underworld and a corrupt corporate boss. So in terms of the film's structure, it's in 4 acts with a short introduction. And the introduction really sets the scene for this crime-ridden city where law and order is completely broken down. We are in this newsroom with this program called Media Break, and the anchors are giving the headlines around the world. But there's one local story which is important. A cop has been killed by this guy called Clarence Boddicker and his gang. Indeed, this guy seems to be behind a lot of the trouble in Detroit, and he will be a key character in the rest of the film. We're also introduced to OCP, this rather sinister corporation who seems to be in control of most aspects of Detroit, including its police force. So Act 1 is all about these 2 rival cyborg programs to clean up the streets of Detroit. And it seems there's these 2 guys in OCP, this corporation, who really want to impress the boss with their ideas. The first guy is called Dick Jones, and he is this ultra shady guy who seems to be only second to the old man at the top, and he has got this program called Ed 209. That goes badly wrong because in this great scene it kills this guy in the OCP headquarters. And then we have this other program, the RoboCop program, which is headed by this guy called Bob Morton. And he wants to just take injured policemen at death's door and kind of rejuvenate them as cyborgs and make them the kind of ultra efficient police officers to clean up the streets of Detroit. And when Ed 209 goes wrong in a demonstration, Bob Norton seizes his chance and he is given a go ahead to develop the RoboCop program, much to the annoyance of Dick Jones, his rival. While all this is going on, there's this police officer called Murphy who's transferred to the toughest part of Detroit, and he comes to this police station, and the police force are about to strike because conditions are so bad, their job is so dangerous. Murphy seems to really want to play his part, and he's met by his partner called Lewis, and she is really tough and she's really great at beating up criminals, etc. And these 2 drive off because they hear that Clarence Boddicker and his crew are around, and they track him down to this abandoned steel mine. And in this horrifying scene, Murphy is basically tortured to death. However, he isn't quite dead, because in Act 2 he is put back together again as RoboCop by Bob Morton and his colleagues. And Murphy becomes the first RoboCop, and he is unveiled, and it seems he's a big success. He's arresting criminals left, right and centre on the crime-infested streets of Detroit. However, it seems that Murphy's memory has not been completely erased. He has nightmares and flashbacks of his life before all this happened, of his wife, his kid, and he also remembers some of the criminals. He encounters one of them, Emil, at a petrol station, and RoboCop, or Murphy, seems to be somewhat poleaxed by this. Act 3 is all about RoboCop tracking down Clarence Boddicker and his crew. And in the meantime, while he's doing this, Dick Jones, the guy in charge of the Ed 209 program, remember, which went wrong because it killed the guy in the office in the OCP headquarters, he gets his own back on Bob Morton, the guy in charge of the RoboCop program. It turns out that he is hiring Clarence Boddicker, this nasty piece of work who is responsible for so much crime in Detroit. He is hiring him to go and kill Bob Morton, his rival. And Clarence Boddicker does that. But RoboCop tracks down Clarence Boddicker and he records Clarence Boddicker admitting that Dick Jones is involved with all this. So Dick Jones now is worried that he's going to end up in prison because of his involvement with Clarence Boddicker and the criminal underworld. After RoboCop arrests Clarence Boddicker, he goes after Dick Jones, but Dick Jones manages to kind of disable RoboCop and he sets Ed 209 on him. And then the kind of guards in OCP, this corporation, try to destroy RoboCop to get rid of this evidence of Dick Jones's involvement in all this crime. However, RoboCop is saved by Lewis, his partner, at the last minute. In the final act, Act 4, Boddicker and then Dick Jones receive their comeuppance. Clarence Boddicker and his crew are eventually killed at the abandoned steel mill where Murphy was tortured to near death earlier on in the film, and then Dick Jones is revealed as the corrupt government official he is, and he ends up being killed as well. And that's the end of the film. Some of the prominent themes in the film include a society in freefall, a society where human life is devalued to the extent that life is cheap and people are just desensitised to violence and death. And of course it's all very darkly comic and satirical in tone. There's a lot about kind of the dog-eat world of corporations and business, and a lot about corruption and kind of people's murky dealings in organised crime. An important theme I think in this film as well is the value of a person's name. Murphy, after he's left for dead, basically his identity is taken away from him. He just becomes RoboCop. One of many eventually, I guess. That's the plan. However, his partner Lewis reminds him that he's really Murphy. And that is so important because despite how deformed he is and how much his life has changed, Murphy, after he is reminded of his name, kind of regains much of his identity and purpose in life. And memorably, right at the end of the film, he identifies himself as Murphy. So, what's the film like? I love this film. I remember when I was a kid, when it came out, I was about 10 years old, and it being a very violent film is something I wasn't allowed to watch. But eventually I did get to see it, behind my parents' back. And it was just one of those films which everyone talked about in the playground. And when I watched it in recent years as an adult, I kind of assumed, it's just going to be, a kind of cool film. But perhaps something which isn't as good as I remember it being. But it is, because it's so layered and it's got depth behind it. It's very funny. It's got such a sharp satirical edge as well. The kind of repeated news bulletins throughout the film and the kind of vox pops with the people around the streets of Detroit are just so hilarious. And they kind of really lighten the mood from the kind of relentless violence, some of which is really shocking. I still think that when Murphy is almost killed by Clarence Boddicker and his crew in the beginning of the film, I still think that is one of the most shocking and violent attacks I've ever seen on a film. Yeah, but the film is so funny, it's got this satiric edge, and, with those themes, it's got kind of a weight and a depth to it, which is quite surprising, I think, from a kind of a sci-fi stroke action film from the kind of mid-80s. Also, I think a special shout-out has to be for Kurtwood Smith. As Clarence Boddicker, he has got to be one of the most memorable and easily quotable villains of the last 50 years. I mean, some of the lines he has are just absolutely brilliant. And he's such a good actor. I mean, if you remember, he's also in Dead Poets Society, for a real contrast, you know. I mean, he really kind of nailed this role. And for me, he is a real highlight. He really lifts the film to another level, actually. I think his performance is that good in this film. So ultimately, I think RoboCop is a real classic of its type. Anyway, what do you think about this film? Please comment below. All the best. Thanks for watching. Bye.